Embassy in Brussels, and by extension the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, for their support of the National Assembly's representation at this session. Honorable members, by letter dated 30th June 2023, Cabinet's recommendation has been signified to the following: International Banking Amendment Number 2, Bill 2023, Domestic Banks and Financial Institution Amendment Number 2, Bill 2023, Limited Liability Partnership Amendment Bill 2023, Trust Amendment Bill 2023, and Inter-American Development Bank Skills for the Future Program US 15 million Loan Motion 2023.
Bills brought from the House of Representatives.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, with your leave, may I just, for this side of the House, say a few words in tribute to Senator Winston Smiling. Madam President, it is well known that Senator Smiling was a foot soldier of the People's United Party, a true revolutionary and a close confidant of the father of the nation, the Right Honorable George Price. Senator Smiling was a man of many talents. First and foremost, he was an extraordinary chef. Someone like Senator Perry Feet and many of us would have had the opportunity to eat from the food that he prepared. He reveled in marinating pork, beef, chicken, and barbecuing, and all the trimmings that go with it. But perhaps if he was an excellent chef, it is to hear him sing, a vocalist extraordinaire, especially when he had an opportunity to wet and lubricate his vocal cords before he sang. A man of extraordinary vocal reach when it comes to his favorite songs. And he was, again, a master at entertaining friends, entertaining people in a bar. There was never a karaoke machine that he passed that he didn't like. Those were his virtues. But Madam President, I would say from my experience with Senator Smiling, he served in many, many capacities. He served our party at all levels for virtually all his life. He served the country on many statutory boards. He served in this Senate, and as I said, a close confidant of the father of the nation. Those of us in the People's United Party regarded him as one of our foremost political strategists. And the reason for that, Madam President, is because when one thinks of Senator Smiling, one thinks of Kipling's If you can walk with kings and never lose your virtue, if you can walk with kings and never lose the common touch, yours is the world and everything that's in it. That is the man, a good man, a patriotic Belizean. May, with divine intervention, his soul find eternal rest. Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to take charge of the following bills: International Banking Amendment Number 2, Bill 2023, Domestic Banks and Financial Institutions Amendment Number 2, Bill 2023, Limited Liability Partnership Amendment Bill 2023, Trust Amendment Bill 2023, and Criminal Code Amendment Bill 2023. Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order Number 49-1, I move that the bills be taken through all their stages forthwith.
Honorable members, the question is that the bills be taken through all their stages forthwith. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Motion relating to this business or sitting of the Senate.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I move that at its rising today, the Senate adjourn to a date to be fixed by the President.
Honorable members, the question is that at its rising today, the Senate adjourn to a date to be fixed by the President. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Public business, government business, motion.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I move that whereas Belize, as a member of the Inter-American Development Bank, the bank is eligible for development assistance in the form of loans, grants, and technical assistance from the bank on such terms and conditions as may be agreed between Belize and the bank from time to time. And whereas the government of Belize has approached the bank for financial assistance to execute a Skills for the Future program that will contribute to the closing of the skills gap to prepare tomorrow's workforce for the fourth industrial revolution, hereinafter referred to as the program. And whereas the program will consist of three components whose activities will: 1, increase access to instruction that accelerates learning in foundational skills; increase access to instruction that promotes learning in fourth industrial revolution skills; and increase access to gender-specific education services to promote inclusive education. And whereas the proposed program will be financed through an IDB direct investment loan in the sum of US $15 million and a non-reimbursable investment financing of US $5 million financed from the resources of the Global Partnership for Education Fund. And whereas it is intended that the execution of the program shall be carried out on behalf of the government by the Ministry of Education, Culture, Science and Technology, acting as executing agency. And whereas the bank has offered financing of up to US $15 million from its ordinary capital resources for the said purpose under the following terms and conditions. Lender, Inter-American Development Bank. Loan principal amount, US $15 million. Disbursement schedule, over a period of 4 years from the date of signature of the loan contract. Loan term, 25 years inclusive of 66 months grace period on principal repayments. Repayment period to be repaid in 39 approximately equal semi-annual and consecutive installments of approximately US $384,615.38. Purpose: to execute a program that will provide full IR and STEAM skills to secondary and TVET students, which is expected to increase student engagement in school and secondary education graduates accessing for IR and STEAM jobs with better salaries. The rate of interest: interest to be charged on the daily outstanding balance of the loan as per the software-based interest rate, plus the applicable lending spread for the bank's ordinary capital loans. Credit fee: a credit fee will be charged on the undisbursed loan balance at a percentage to be established by the bank on a periodic basis not exceeding 0.75% per annum. And whereas under the provisions of Section 7.2 of the Finance and Audit Reform Act 2005, the government of Belize is required to obtain the prior authorization of the National Assembly by way of a resolution for such borrowing. Now therefore be it resolved that this Honorable House, being satisfied that the loan proceeds would significantly assist the government of Belize in its efforts to expand the pedagogical model of the Belize City STEAM Laboratory School to more education institutions and to respond to the gaps in learning that widened during the pandemic, approves and confirms that the government may enter into a loan contract with the Inter-American Development Bank on the terms and conditions set out above, and further authorizes the Minister of Finance to execute and deliver the said loan contract and all other documents associated therewith. Madam President, the relevant documents are before the Senate.
I recognize Senator Michael Perfy.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Madam President. When you look at the motion, and it talks about it will consist of three components whose activities will: 1, increase access to instruction that accelerates learning in foundational skills. How can anybody object to anything like that? It's like asking for world peace. Increase access to instruction that promotes learning in 4 IR skills, and increase access to gender-specific education services to promote inclusive education. When you read that, Madam President, and that forms the basis, the constitution, that, if you will, for the bill itself, and I'm sure my colleagues may comment on the integrity of the motion in terms of whether or not we need to go in this direction, whether or not it needs to be for the whole country instead of just one part of the country and the like. But Madam President, this reads to me, and this is my narrow issue on the matter, this reads to me like something that is very foundational, very earth-moving, in the sense that you're looking to increase the skills for not only students but teachers and the like, and it's a big task, and to me would form the basis of skills training that you would want to do for the country. But this is my issue. This is my narrow issue on the matter. And I say this, as I said in the last meeting for other bills. Why do we insist on borrowing for these things? Why would we need to borrow for such a fundamental thing? We're talking about $30 million, Madam President. If you chop that the way the loan is supposed to be disbursed in over a period of 4 years, just assuming it's $7.5 million per year, just assume that. Can't we budget for that? Can't we do a simple, the things that we see budgeted for, the useless things that we see get budgeted $10, $15 million. I mean, can't we budget $7.5 million per year for this? It tells me, Madam President, that there is either a lack of planning and or the government is not performing the way it claims it's performing, to be earning enough government revenue to fund something like this, which is $7.5 million a year. Something like this, to find $7.5 million for in your budget, should be a priority. It should be a priority. We shouldn't be borrowing for something like this. We are over $700 million in borrowing, you know, Madam President, since November 2020. When you look at all these money bills that come here for loans from all over the place, over $700 million. And all this does is add to that debt count. And just to give you an example, Madam President, when the PUP were opening the UDP road the other day, the coastal road, man, the Hubert Elrington road, name it after the man, please. When they were opening that road, one of the boss was this, UDP belonged to them. Yeah, I want to hug up Emer too, but I love Emer Hernandez all of a sudden. It's amazing. He's pretty now. But Madam President, the Prime Minister said, he boasted, even if you believe him, that this government supposedly saved $6 million on the road. Let's just say we believe him. $6 million. Add 1.5 to that for the next year, and you have your program. You have your program funded. They will no doubt come and say they saved another $6 million to $10 million on another UDP project, the Halover Bridge. You are here, well, we save millions on that too. Well, then take that, add to it, you have your program for the second year. They will come and claim that they save money on Caracol Road too, another UDP project. You take that, you put it on top of something, and you have your budget for skills training, Northern Highway. There's so many things that you can take that money and simply budgeted for. Madam President, I don't have a fundamental issue with wanting to do a program like this. I have an issue as to why we're borrowing again. Borrowing again. $30 million added to the debt. And that is my concern, Madam President, that I wanted to point out about the motion. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Thanks, Madam President. Madam President, I rise to support the motion. I think that I looked at the annex to the motion, Madam President, and I went through it, and I think it's extremely impressive to be addressing some of these critical areas necessary in education. You look at primary school, primary education training for teachers, extremely critical. Training special needs, what they call the fourth industrial revolution, which is basically looking at the future in terms of where it's going with respect to technology. STEAM as opposed to STEM, I think is extremely important to just add the arts into that. I think that our education system has to be a very wide umbrella, Madam President. We have, I think for too long, we've had a one-size-fits-all in education, so it's either business or science, and very narrow areas in science. But there's so many of our young people who want to be professional singers, professional in the visual arts and the other areas. And so I think we need to make sure that we can accommodate those desires and those ambitions, Madam President. So I think it's an extremely important initiative. And I know that we're talking about $15 million for this program, but I really believe that when it comes to education, when it comes to training for the future, when we're talking about our young people, I think those are certainly monies I think we need to afford. And I'm not getting into the debate on whether or not it should have come from an internal budget or loans, but I think this type of initiative is extremely important. One area, though, Madam President, I think we have to look at as we're going into these types of projects is while we're putting the projects in place, I really think that we need to start addressing young people's attitude towards education. And so we spend all this money to put all these programs in place, but then we see young people dropping out of school or not going into schools. I think we have to find a way jointly as a country to make education cool, the same way that they look at other influential actors in the society and they follow those, even those might not be positive. I think we really need to try to address the attitude of young people to education and school. We need to get more of those people into the classrooms, into training programs, into many of the initiatives like what we're talking about in this loan document. I'm hoping that at some point in the future we could have a larger discussion in this in terms of how we could start working on changing the attitude of young people, so that they want to go to school, so that they want to be trained, so that they want to be professional, so that they want to contribute positively to the society. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Bishop Alvin Bengashek.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam President, allow me to, before I say anything else on the motion, to also indicate that I had an opportunity on behalf of the Senate to have attended the Commonwealth Parliamentary Academy in Canada recently, and I was very happy for that opportunity. But it also afforded me the opportunity to have passed through New York on my way back home. Perhaps it is important that I note that I had the opportunity to have attended the Belize American Chamber of Commerce Investment Forum there in New York. And it was very eye-opening because I had the opportunity to have met with one Vernon Palmer, who, as a Belizean American, is supporting Belize through a project called Project Jumpstart Belize. And what she's doing is that, in fact, one of her latest initiatives is that one of our cyclists, who unfortunately fractured one of his arms and could not afford medical care here in Belize, that he was taken to New York, and through her project, she was able to assist in that situation. And so I want to commend efforts of Belizeans who are living abroad and are sharing the work and are still concerned about Belize, even though they're living abroad. And she's working on behalf of her grandmother, Elfria Miguel, formerly from San Antonio Village in Corozal. Very effective, and I think that is commendable. Madam President, I rise to support this motion before us this morning. And I say, and I can do so because as I look at what is before us, it is initiated and will come through the Ministry of Education. And I say that because I recognize that the minister himself and the Minister of State in that ministry, they have been performing quite well in ensuring that we account for whatever comes to their ministry. And they have been working quite effectively through their different personnels and committees in ensuring that we continue to execute good education in this country. And so I want to continue to commend the minister and his team. As it is proposed here, Madam President, I see that TVET will benefit in a very instrumental way. I believe that TVET has been one of those educational sector in Belize that we can call the Cinderella of the educational sector. In time past, there were students who were enrolled in such programs because it is claimed that they could not perform in other sectors. And so it is good to be able to see that initiatives such as this is being intentionally taken by the government. I want to have, however, address another aspect as to perhaps what can be done in the future. I know in recent times some of the teachers have been complaining that they have not been receiving their regular salaries, the monthly salaries, and that is a concern that I have heard all over the country. And some of these persons have only stayed in the profession because they love what they're doing. But all in all, I think that what I see here, especially as it is spelled out that the target is to be able to focus and come through the primary schools, come through the high schools, and then for them to also be able to fully benefit from a well-rounded education. I think it is a very good initiative, and I want to certainly support what is before us this morning. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Luke Martinez.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you very much, Madam President. Of course, the National Trade Union Congress support these types of initiatives, Madam President, because it has to do with strengthening and enhancing our education system. Yes, Madam President. We too are also concerned when we see loans. Of course, we agree to that if you are serious about meaningfully address the education gap in the region, then we must invest. We also want to remind the Minister of Finance and the Ministry of Education to ensure that they increase the budget in these areas so that we could limit the amount of borrowing, especially for these types of projects. Madam President, when we saw that there will be investment in IT vets, that's very good news for us, because we agree that the technical ability needs to be increased. And just as Senator Bengoshe, Senator Herrera had mentioned, that we want to develop professionals in these areas. We want to take the opportunity to encourage the government to roll out the STEAM throughout the country, not just in one area. We understand that some projects are piloted and they are working well, but we want them to be effectively rolled out in every country, in every district, Madam President. The IT vet teachers are struggling with their salaries. They are struggling with the fact that some of them continue to work as contract teachers. And at some point, Madam President, we need to ensure that they are permanently established as teachers at these IT vets. We support the motion. Very quickly though, Madam President, we want to encourage the government to pay attention to the bells and whistles in this contract. Right? It's very important for them to pay attention to the bells and whistles. We believe that the bells and whistles are good enough, but we want them to ensure that they follow and they abide by it. Because if there is any sign of corruption, that bucket is going to sink and it's not going to see the top of the well. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Chris Cowie.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise in support of this motion, and certainly I would like to congratulate the Ministry of Education, Minister Francis Fonseca, his Minister of State, and the entire team at the Ministry of Education. I think this is certainly much needed for the development of, as the title says, skills for the future for our children. When we look at as always I tend to refer to the data, when we look at the statistics on employment, the unemployment rate has come down to all-time lows. I think the last survey indicated an unemployment rate of 5%, and the expectation by this Wednesday, the Statistical Institute of Belize will come out with updated results, and I am sure that the results will be better than those of last October. But there certainly are issues that remain. While unemployment is at all-time low, we still have issues on labor force participation. And part of the reason for labor force participation challenges is skills and the skills gap. As the loan and the terms for the loan speak to, the intent of this loan is to address that skills gap. It speaks to the fourth industrial revolution and really STEAM, the level of skill required, the jobs that are being created in the economy. Our workforce, our labor force, and our children are not necessarily being trained to meet those job opportunities. So this loan and the analysis done that arrived at this proposed loan was an analysis that looked at that skills gap and how do we close that skills gap. That was done with the support of the IDB over many years. This is not something that's political. This was being conducted under the UDP administration as well. The IDB, in fact, has lent to the government under the UDP administration several education loans. I think you could go back to the education sector reform project from way back of around 2012. Then you have the Education Quality Improvement Program 1 and now Education Quality Improvement Program 2 that is ongoing. And now this project. So the IDB has played an important role to and with the Ministry of Education in trying to impact in a positive way the education of our kids for their future. So I certainly expect and it's no surprise, the support from senators, including senators from the other side, on this motion. So, Senator Perfit, thanks for supporting just the narrow issue that you raised. Unfortunately, you are forcing me to have to respond to that narrow issue. But as I highlighted, you know, there's the precedent of the past administration. I think in terms of the loans that they have procured, it's upwards of $50 million plus. But beyond that, beyond just the fact that that has been done in the past, is yes, the support from the IDB and the IDB technical team to ensure that we are doing what is right, we are doing what is necessary to close that skills gap. But from a finance standpoint, I think that's where, unfortunately, you get lost in looking at these figures, and it's unfortunate. It really is unfortunate. The very fact, those couple little points, the very fact that the IDB is prepared to lend the money is indicative of the ability to repay. So your point raised in itself really makes no sense. But I think you missed a little phrase in the loan motion, and that has to do with the grant. So alongside that $15 million loan is another $5 million US grant. So what, as far as that package that's being pulled together through the support of the IDB comes along, the $5 million does come along, $10 million Belize dollars does come along with that. So when you combine that, it's not only that you're getting the grant, but it's the overall package of finance that is secured that is actually lower in cost than the overall cost that would be incurred if the government were to go and raise the money even locally. So I think that so far as financial management, what you will see is the procurement of the costs, the procurement of that finance and the costs associated with that makes sense, makes financial sense. The borrowing in general, recall where things were by the end of the past administration and look at where things are. Clearly, there is this night, as Senator said, it's night and day as far as the management of the finances of this government. So much so that the IMF themselves, the IMF doesn't feel, surprisingly enough, doesn't feel the need to even come to Belize at this next staff meeting. We're not a concern to them as they were under the UDP administration before. So the purpose of the loan, the intent for the Ministry of Education to close the skills gap is clearly something that is needed for the students of this country. The financial arrangements make sense. So, Madam President, I fully support this motion.
Madam President, just to wind up the debate, all senators, I believe, agree that the objective of this loan is commendable and supported. As I understand it, Senator Perfeet's narrow issue was that we were borrowing the 15 million US. Not being a man of finance, Senator Corey had to first of all point out to him that there was a US $5 million grant that, you say so? That's $10 million per feet. And I am saying, Madam President, that Senator Perfeet, if he was doing proper analysis, would have brought that into account. But he was once again schooled. His proposal, and this is where we differ, his proposal, Madam President, is to take the $15 million US and say, we don't want that loan. We are financing it ourselves. So you can tell IDB, that 10 million way to give it, we don't want that neither. Keep that. Here, he doesn't want the 10 million Belize grant. His proposal is to take the 15 million US, you multiply it by 2, you get that correct, it comes to 30 million. You divide it by 4, you get that correct, you get 7.5 million. Correct? And he says, Madam President, that in his view, what the government should do is finance that out of its own recurrent expenditure. 7.5 million a year. Let us look at what the government's proposal is and compare it to what Senator
Perfeet, I'm going to ask you to be mindful of the standing order for when someone is speaking. And I have allowed you to respond from time to time, but I'm going to ask you to let the leader of government business speak.
I'm most grateful, Madam President. You know, Senator Luke would know Rima. You know Rima? Afrobeats. Calm down, calm down. I'm winding up, Madam President. What the loan terms say is, first of all, 5.5 years grace period. We're not paying nothing for the first 5.5 years. Senator Perifit is saying instead of that grace period, he wants to be spending $7.5 million each year out of local, out of government revenue. Senator Bengoshe said that they are struggling right now. Senator Martinez said they're struggling right now to pay teachers. Senator Perifit prefers, rather than to take 5.5 year grace period, rather than to take a $10 million grant, he wants to spend $7.5 million each year beginning now. Look at what the loan terms say, Madam President. After the 5.5 year grace period, we will then pay $384,615.38. Wrong out of the $400,000, $800,000. He is paying 7.5. Government is taking a grace period for 5.5 years and then paying $800,000. It is our respectful 39 years. Now, let's read together. To be repaid in 39 approximately equal. Ay, man. Ay, man. All I'm saying, Madam President, is there is a fundamental difference between us. On our side, we acknowledge that it is a loan. We agree that the purpose is commendable. We believe that with growth in the economy, we will be able to pay the semi-annual installments of $800,000 after 5.5 year grace period. And therefore, we commend this, Madam President, to the Senate.
Honorable members, honorable members, honorable members, I am speaking. Honorable members, the question is now, therefore be it resolved, that this Honorable House, being satisfied that the loan proceeds would significantly assist the government of Belize in its effort to expand the pedagogical model of the Belize City STEAM Laboratory School to more education institutions and to respond to the gaps in learning that widened during the pandemic, approves and confirms that the government may enter into a loan contract with the Inter-American Development Bank on the terms and conditions set out above, and further authorizes the Minister of Finance to execute and deliver the said loan contract and all other documents associated therewith. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Bills for second reading.
I recognize the leader of government business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the International Banking Act, Chapter 267 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, revised edition 2020, to amend the measures for single borrower limits among banks and financial institutions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, it is a very short bill commended to the Senate by the Central Bank of Belize, which seeks to delete a clause that says, except with the prior written approval of the central bank, from clause, subsection 2 of section 21B. Essentially, what the section as it currently exists provides for is for the central bank to give approval for total loans, advances, and extensions of credit by a bank to a person to exceed 25% of the fully paid up and unimpaired capital reserves of a licensee or financial institution. With the amendment, that discretion given to the central bank is being removed, and therefore the limit will be a hard limit of the 25% fully paid up, unimpaired capital reserves of a licensee. Sorry, Madam President. The leader of the opposition in the Senate is suggesting, with your permission, that we take the first four bills together. They are all a part of the reform of the financial sector. If you so approve.
You may so proceed.
Much obliged, Madam President. The second bill is the Domestic Banks and Financial Institutions Amendment Number 2 bill. Madam President, I rise to move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Domestic Banks and Financial Institutions Act, Chapter 263 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to amend the measures of a single borrower limit among banks and financial institutions, to improve measures for mergers and acquisitions among other banks and financial institutions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. I move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Limited Liability Partnership Act, Chapter 258 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to further facilitate compliance with the Financial Action Task Force Recommendation 24, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. And I move the second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Trust Act, Chapter 202 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the duties of trustees and trust agents, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, turning to the Domestic Banks and Financial Institution Amendment Bill, that bill seeks to do a similar thing, to remove that discretion from the central bank, and also to put limits and restrictions on mergers and acquisitions so that the financial sector of the country can remain dispersed and not consolidated into one or two financial institutions alone, and to provide for improved procedures for those mergers. The Limited Liability Partnership Act, Madam President, and the Trust Amendment Bill 2023, these bills simply provide for more disclosure, more transparency, in keeping with the recommendations of the Financial Action Task Force. Madam President, I ask that the question be put in respect of these bills.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the International Banking Act, Chapter 267 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to amend the measures for single borrow limits among banks and financial institutions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Domestic Banks and Financial Institutions Act, Chapter 263 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to amend the measures for single borrow limits among banks and financial institutions, to improve measures for mergers and acquisitions among other banks and financial institutions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Limited Liability Partnership Act, Chapter 258 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to further facilitate compliance with the Financial Action Task Force Recommendation 24, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Trust Act, Chapter 202 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the duties of trustees and trust agents, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
The bill for an act to amend the International Banking Act, Chapter 267 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to amend the measures for single borrowers limit among banks and financial institutions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. A bill for an act to amend the Domestic Banks and Financial Institution Act, Chapter 263 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to amend the measures of single borrowing limit among banks and financial institutions, to improve measures for mergers and acquisition among other banks and financial institutions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. The bill for an act to amend the Limited Liability Partnership Act, Chapter 258 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to further facilitate compliance with the Financial Action Task Force Recommendation 24, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. The bill for an act to amend the Trust Act, Chapter 202 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the duties of trustees and trust agents, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to move a second reading of a bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code Act, Chapter 101 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to repeal provisions relating to the deliberate or reckless spreading of HIV/AIDS and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Madam President, this is a decriminalizing of the transmission of HIV/AIDS as recommended by our partners internationally and the National AIDS Commission.
I recognize Senator Michael Purfey.
Thank you, Madam President. AIDS has always been a delicate topic, Madam President, and for me personally, the only difference, the major difference between that and any other, just to keep it simple, sexually transmitted disease, because of course you can contract that through needles and the like, or any exchange of blood in any form. It doesn't have to be through sexual activity. Well, Madam President, I'm not aware that there's been a cure for the disease, and certainly it is one that still kills you. Now, we can decriminalize it in terms of, in whichever way we want to decriminalize it, but it doesn't take away from the fact that it is a deadly weapon. And for the bill, I understand the movement, I understand the evolvement that the world is going through, the whole woke culture and all that. I understand that we want to be very civilized. And while I do take the view, I treat sexual activity like boxing, Madam President. You protect yourself at all times. But there are certain instances, and I would have liked to have seen the exception here in this act. What this bill is doing is saying, listen, you have the responsibility to protect yourself. So you can't blame anybody. It's not a criminal offense for anybody to have the disease, you engage in sex with them, they give you the disease, they know they had it, they didn't inform you that they have it, and so therefore no, it's no longer an offense. Fine, because you are responsible for testing your partner or protection or whatever. But Madam President, there's an exception, I believe, that I would like to see in the bill. And I've searched for a better way to coin it because it sounds very ugly. But I would like to see that there be put in here what I would term a rape exception. Madam President, if a person is sexually assaulted, rape, you have no choice in the matter. Certainly a rapist is not going to say, I'm about to rape you, but I'm going to courteously inform you that I have HIV. They're not going to do that. In a rape situation, you do not have a choice. You do not have a choice to protect yourself or not protect yourself. And if you have HIV or you have AIDS, and you rape a person, and you don't use protection, and you exchange bodily fluids, you are essentially giving that person a death sentence without the proper medication. And Madam President, we flippantly pass these laws that we import from other nations where AIDS medication, detection, testing, treatment, for some of them are easily and readily available. Are we saying that in Belize that is easily and readily available? Medication, is it cheap? Is it easily accessible? Those are some of the things. If we're going to treat it like a regular STD, for example, are we saying that we have treatments to match the seriousness of this disease? But so, Madam President, I understand the movement we're going in, but I would have just like to see that where a person does not have a choice in a sexual activity, that in addition to that person being penalized for rape, they should be penalized for transmitting a disease that doesn't go away in 2 weeks. That's my input, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Janelle Chinona.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to first associate our recommendations that in addition to decriminalizing this, because we certainly agree that mother-to-child transmission is not reason, that was cited as one of the reasons for this, that we're not criminalizing mothers here. But as had just been pointed out, that we certainly would like to see an additional aggravated assault charge or some type of additional dimension to cases of not just rape, but certainly sexual abuse or any activity under the criminal code that also results in infection. I say this, Madam President, because in 2000 I was working as a journalist, and I remember distinctly if I could call it, the panic and the fear of Belize's prevalence rates. And we had to cover that issue more than one occasion. And it had such a profound effect on me in my first year as a journalist that when I left to go do my master's, I actually did my thesis on behavior change. And I can't associate with there is no cure, because there is a cure. It's education and it's behavior change. And the bottom line is, though, that while we support the decriminalization and recommend the amendments to the other parts of the criminal code for an aggravated dimension in the cases we've cited, I think the bigger context, the national picture that we have to associate ourselves as parliamentarians with is the reality is that we don't talk about sex. And you see how some people react even physically when you just say the word. We have to begin to educate ourselves about what sex is. And I will tell you scarily that 23 years ago when I did my interviews with my focus groups, you had men of certain professions saying, well, eat sweet with wrapper on it. You had girls in secondary school saying they would rather engage in anal sex because they won't get pregnant, not knowing what they were exposing themselves to in terms of STIs and STDs. And even more disturbingly, that was 23 years ago. Today, the health sector reports that the stigma is alive and well. And it is a problem that the free antiretrovirals that are available, the free condoms, is still an issue for people to even access. It's there and people can't access because then you end up with a nickname. That one must have Bosto. That is the reality of it, that NGOs have to go into these clinics, get these retrovirals and have them secreted to people so that they can access their medical treatment. If we don't recognize that that environment has to change, if we're serious about bringing this, yes, deadly disease to an end in Belize, that is the reality that we have to confront, the stigma with it. Even in COVID, I remember when the vaccines became available and they announced, oh, these groups have special access, and they included HIV-infected persons, and I had to laugh. Which person will show up to any of these clinics or these vaccination sites and say, I'm in the group that says I'm HIV, therefore you have to do it? And I know they were asking because people volunteering at those desks were saying, well, what category do I put you in? There was one person that showed up 3 times and they turned that person away because he couldn't say that he had HIV. So we just take this opportunity, Madam President, to call out that it is civilized to decriminalize this, but even more civilized is the reality is that we have to talk about it. We talk about it, you know, we shush who go outside picnic, we shush who jack up, and we have all of those conversations, but we don't talk to our children about sexual health and how to protect themselves. We assume that people are knowledgeable about where these access points for these treatments and these prophylactics exist. That is the reality of it. That is the reality of it. So we raise that and it is not on government, let's be clear, it's not on government. This is a cultural thing, this is a national thing, and this is something we have to take on as a society. Thank you.
Madam President, I ask that the question be put.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code Act, Chapter 101 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to repeal provisions relating to the deliberate or reckless spreading of HIV/AIDS and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a second time. All those in favor, kindly say aye. Aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
The bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code Act, Chapter 101 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to repeal provisions relating to the deliberate or reckless spreading of HIV/AIDS and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Committee of the Whole Senate on Bills.
I'm going to ask for visitors to clear the gallery, please.
Bills.
I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to report that the Committee of the Whole Senate has considered the International Banking Amendment Number 2 Bill 2023, the Domestic Banks and Financial Institution Amendment Number 2 Bill 2023, the Limited Liability Partnership Amendment Bill 2023, the Trust Amendment Bill 2023, and the Criminal Code Amendment Bill 2023, and pass them without amendment.
Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the International Banking Act, Chapter 267 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to amend the measures for single borrow limits among banks and financial institutions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Domestic Banks and Financial Institutions Act, Chapter 263 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to amend the measures for single borrow limits among banks and financial institutions, to improve measures for mergers and acquisition among other banks and financial institutions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Limited Liability Partnership Act, Chapter 258 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to further facilitate compliance with the Financial Action Task Force Recommendation 24, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Trust Act, Chapter 202 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the duties of trustees and trust agents, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time. Honorable members, the question is that the bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code, Act Chapter 101 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to repeal provisions related to the deliberate or reckless spreading of HIV/AIDS, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto, be read a third time. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it.
The bill for an act to amend the International Banking Act, Chapter 267 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to amend the measures of single borrowing limits among banks and financial institutions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. Bill for an act to amend the Domestic Banks and Financial Institution Act, Chapter 263 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to amend the measures for single borrowing limit among banks and financial institutions, to improve measures of mergers and acquisition among other banks and financial institutions, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. The bill for an act to amend the Limited Liability Partnership Act, Chapter 258 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to further facilitate compliance with the Financial Action Task Force Recommendation 24, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. The bill for an act to amend the Trust Act, Chapter 202 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to expand the duties of trustees and trust agents, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. The bill for an act to amend the Criminal Code, Act Chapter 101 of the Substantive Laws of Belize, Revised Edition 2020, to repeal provisions relating to the deliberate or reckless spreading of HIV/AIDS, and to provide for matters connected therewith or incidental thereto. She said she was going to do something.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Madam President, I would like to raise a matter under Standing Order 12.2 that I believe is an issue of urgent public importance, and that is the issue of the energy situation in the country. Madam President, again, I want to thank you for allowing me to speak on this issue. I know that the timelines were getting a little tight, but I think we made it in compliance of the standing orders. I think we were all shocked on June 21st of this year, Madam President, when BL announced that Mexico was having issues with supply and may actually cut Belize, and that would have resulted in blackouts, and that would have affected the country. I think, Madam President, if you look at if Mexico would have had gone out, and I think they did for a while. The country's demand is 106 megawatts, and that is the domestic supply, Madam President, is 107.5 megawatts, I believe. So any surges in demand after that time, after the Mexican supply would have gone out, would have resulted in what they call load shedding, Madam President, which is basically a fancy term for serial blackouts caused by a system overload. In fact, I think the Mandela of June 24th had headlines, Belize on the brink of a power crisis. Now, I raise the issue, Madam President, because I think that we can do something about it. I don't have a quarrel with BL about this situation because, first and foremost, BL is supposed to be a transmission and distribution company. The issue is more with respect to our policies and our regulators, who over the past decade have not done more to avert this situation. Madam President, when we take the Mexican supply out of the equation, which should be around 55 megawatts, currently there are not a whole lot of options available. In fact, none that I know of, apart from domestic supply, whose supply is the bare equivalent of demand. Had the rains not come in early July, there could have been a major crisis that would have had dire consequences on businesses and households. As we know, energy is the backbone of businesses, whether to power machines, store information, or to operate generally, Madam President. So it's an extremely critical issue for us overall. Madam President, while that is the situation that exists, what I really want to get at is how we can get out of this situation. Currently, the power supply is 53 in country, 46% from Mexico, and 3% from non-renewable resources. Current hydroelectric capacity is produced by 25.5 megawatts at the Mejon, 7.7 megawatts at Chalillo Hydroelectric Dam, 19 megawatts at the Vaca, and 3.5 megawatts at the Hydro Maya Dam. The University of Belize has a solar voltaic system, Madam President, and supplies 0.1% of the country's electrical supply. And then biomass covers about 8.9% of that. Madam President, the point is Belize can do a lot better in this area. Belize has significant solar and wind resources, and yet only 0.1% of our power supply comes from solar. In 2014, the PUC issued a request for proposals for 60 megawatts of baseload generating capacity and 15 megawatts of solar or wind generating capacity. The PUC received 22 proposals for renewable energy projects. 20 of those projects incorporated solar photovoltaic, yet 9 years after, nothing has happened in solar. Madam President, the government has to issue the directives for those responsible to get this done. By getting this done, I'm specifically referring to getting Belize to energy independence. We have to remember, Madam President, that whenever there's an issue in Mexico, we are not priority. And so they will prioritize their users. And so whenever there's any type of pressure on their supply, they will cut Belize and supply their own people, which you can't quarrel with them with. And so I think we have to really look at what we can do to try to avoid that situation. And I think this can be done, Madam President, by creating sensible investment frameworks that provide incentives for those investing in renewable power generation. Create a strategic mix of clean fuels and battery storage. Again, these are where the entire world is going with respect to solar, battery storage, and those areas. Allow these companies to recover their investments early at rates no lower or higher than what CFE is currently enjoying. And once the cost of the investment has been recovered, Madam President, then those rates can come down so that they can make a reasonable rate of return on their investments. But to me, I think you want to incentivize the investments by having people try to get back their investments as quickly as possible. Have BL focus unlimited to upgrading and expansion of transmission and distribution, while leaving generation to private players or private investors. And then move to integrate with CPAC so that we have the option to sell and buy power through the Central American Electrical Interconnection System. Again, that is extremely important, Madam President, because if we're pushing investments in power generation, then we might have power to sell at some point. And so we would want to be integrated into that type of system so that we can sell our excess. We cannot leave this country vulnerable to what the Mexican situation is, Madam President. I think we've been with CFE for a long time, and I forgot to check exactly when we started out with CFE, but it's well over a decade already and probably close to 2 decades. And so I think that it's only right, Madam President, at this time that we look at our power mix very, very closely, and that we develop the type of energy supply that will serve us. I mean, we have solar. I mean, we have hydro already, and that has been serving us well with respect to generation. And if we couple that with solar and wind, especially solar, given that the times when the hydro facilities are most pressured because of limited rainfall, that is the very time we have a lot of sun, and that would be in the dry weather months. And so to me, it's very complementary, those areas. And then we have all the wind resources in the Keys and on our coastlines, I think that we can take care of. And I'm not at all proposing us going into any of the dirty type of fuels, but I think that we can create that mix. We have much cleaner fuels to work with as well, Madam President. And so I think coming together and pushing this issue as urgently as possible will help us to get out of this situation within the next year or two. Thank you, Madam President.
private members' business. Motion.
I recognize Senator Janelle Chinona.
Thank you, Madam President. I rise to present a motion for the appointment of a special select committee to investigate all documents, communications, and processes tied to the signing of the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 2020, and to investigate all documents, communications, and processes that resulted in the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 2020, being presented to Cabinet accompanied by draft legislation and Cabinet White Paper in May 2023. Whereas paragraph D, section 61A2 of the Constitution of Belize provides that among the powers and functions of the Senate is the instituting and conducting of inquiries and investigations on any matter of public interest or importance, at paragraph G thereof, requiring the attendance before it of any chief executive officer in a government ministry in respect of any matter of which he has knowledge by virtue of his office or in respect of anything related to his office and the due execution of his duties, and at paragraph H thereof, requiring the attendance before any committee of the Senate of any minister of government. And whereas the public has become aware of a signed document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 2020, and given that the document has subsequently been presented to Cabinet along with draft legislation and a Cabinet White Paper in May 2023 on the recommendation of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Tourism, and within the context of questions regarding the legality of the contents of that document, and whereas the government has committed to fight corruption and work to restore confidence in government and tabled same in a good governance motion in January 2021, to signal, quote, serious about meaningful reward and open accountable governance to all Belizeans. And whereas the government acknowledges and heeds the call of the citizenry, including several of the social partners represented in the Senate through the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry, BCCCI, the Belize Business Bureau, BBB, the National Trade Union Congress of Belize, the NTUCB, the Belize Council of Churches, BCC, and the Evangelical Association of Churches, EAC, and the non-governmental organizations, NGOs, in recognition that the chronology, communications, and legality tied to and related to this agreement are matters of public importance, and that in the interest of ensuring good governance and compliance with organizational best practice and statutory requirements, it is desirable that the Senate exercises its powers and functions under the Constitution of Belize to conduct an inquiry into and investigate this agreement. And whereas Standing Order number 69 of the Senate Standing Orders, which are further herein referred to, provides for the appointment of a special select committee other than a standing committee by order of the Senate, which shall specify the terms of reference of the committee, including its composition. And whereas the Standing Order number 70 provides, among other things, that every select committee shall be so constituted as to ensure, as far as possible, that the balance of the parties in the Senate is reflected in the committee. And whereas Standing Order number 72 provides authority to enable the Special Select Committee to summon witnesses to a sitting thereof, now be it resolved that the Senate shall approve the appointment pursuant to Standing Order number 69 of a Special Select Committee of the Senate, hereinafter referred to as the committee, with the following terms of reference and composition. Terms of reference: to conduct an independent and impartial investigation and inquiry into the signing of the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 2020, and to determine which, if any, established procedures and or investment policy were followed. 2, to determine what advice, policy, or basis the Cabinet relied upon to establish the validity of the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 2020, into all communications and documents tied to the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 2020, and into all communications and documentations tied to the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 2020, being presented to Cabinet along with draft legislation and a Cabinet white paper in May 2023 on the stated recommendation of the Ministry of Finance and the Ministry of Tourism. To require the production of such communications and documentations, papers and records as the committee shall deem relevant to the inquiry and examine pertinent documentation. To determine whether consequent on the investigation and inquiry, statutory and other procedures were complied with. To require the attendance before the committee of former ministers of government, current ministers of government, signatories of the agreement, and or those who may have information by virtue of his office which may be relevant to the inquiry pursuant to Section 61A(2)(g) of the Constitution of Belize. To require the attendance before the committee of those heads of departments, regulatory committees, and or those who may have information by virtue of his office or responsible for and involved with the issuance of environmental compliance, clearance permits et al., and or any other official of government who may have information which may be relevant to the inquiry pursuant to 61A(2)(h) of the Government of Belize. To require the attendance before the committee of all such current and former public officers in the ministry responsible for the ministries of investment and trade, economic development, finance, tourism, etc., as well as those responsible for ports, environment, etc., pursuant to Standing Order Number 72 of the Senate Standing Orders, as well as to produce all relevant communication, papers, and records of the ministry, departments, et al., as may be necessary to conduct its inquiry and investigation. To examine all such persons required to attend before committees as witnesses pursuant to Standing Order Number 72 of the Senate Standing Orders. To hold and conduct its sittings and meetings in public and broadcast live, except for sittings which are held only for the purpose of deliberation of the matters which are subject of the committee, which sittings shall be held in private. That the committee shall hold its hearings with due urgency and expedition in accordance with Standing Orders Number 75 of the Senate Standing Orders, make a report to this Honorable Senate as soon as may be practicable of the result of its inquiries, with all such comments and recommendations as the committee may deem fit, furnishing this Honorable Senate with a full statement of its proceedings and of the reasons leading to its conclusions and recommendations, that the report shall be tabled in this Honorable Senate and become a public document. All committee members shall be allowed sufficient time and equal opportunity to question witnesses and shall be permitted to question each witness who attends a sitting. Each witness shall be afforded the opportunity pursuant to Standing Order Number 7213 of the Senate Standing Orders to review his or her evidence and findings of the report and shall have the opportunity to suggest corrections due to inaccurate reporting within 14 days from the date which the report was sent to the witness by the clerk. The committee shall be permitted to hire attorneys, accountants, and other such experts as required by the committee, and the office of the Senate shall be the office of the Secretariat of the committee. Composition of the Special Select Committee, that the committee be appointed consisting of 6 senators as follows: 1 from those appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister, 1 from those appointed on the advice of the Leader of Opposition, the 1 appointed on the advice from the Belize Council of Churches and the Evangelical Association of Churches, the 1 appointed on the advice of the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Belize Business Bureau, the 1 appointed on the advice of the National Trade Union Congress and the Civil Society Steering Committee, and the 1 appointed on the advice of the non-governmental organizations. The senators who are members of the committee shall, at first meeting of the committee, elect a chairman of the committee, and the quorum of the committee shall be 4. Madam President, I take this opportunity to call out 3 amendments have been sent to the clerk. First, wherever the term Cabinet White Paper appears, it is to be replaced with Cabinet Confidential Memo 84 of 2023. One minute, Madam President. at bullet 2 for the terms of reference. The original text stated to determine what advice, policy, or basis the Cabinet relied upon to establish the validity of the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, DBA, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 2020. We wish to amend to replace that text wherever it appears in the motion to the words, to determine what advice, policy, or basis the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development and Investment, in consultation with the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations, relied upon to prepare Cabinet Confidential Memo 84 of 2023, recommendations and draft legislation, and subsequently submitted for Cabinet's consideration and approval. I also take this opportunity to call out that, I don't know if it was autocorrect, but in the original motion, we had cited that the title of the document we refer to as the Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize had the word definitive spelled with an A. So just for sake of clarity, we wish to highlight that the original document is not spelled definitive grammatically correctly, A, but I believe the original document does have an A in that document. And at the second whereas, it should be regarding the legality of the contents, not the context. At the first page, the second whereas, it should be the legality of the contents of that document as opposed to context. Those are the amendments to the motion.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
I just rise to second the motion, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Michael Perfit.
Thank you, Madam President. I was going to do that, but Herrera. Madam President, I would like to see the motion in its original form, with one from government, one from opposition, and 4 from the social partners, despite what the Senate standing orders will say, because we could change that. You know, we would like to see this inquiry be led and dominated by, for all intents and purposes, the private sector in the Senate, and not the politicians in the Senate, who are, and I say politicians mean, if you're appointed by a politician, you're in politics. And politicians have appointed 9 of us, and we assume that the other 4 senators were appointed purely, non-politically. So, Madam President, I said we presume. I presume that. I presume. I have no evidence to the contrary. And so, Madam President, even with the adjustments to the motion, we still, on this side, wholeheartedly support this private member's motion for us to have a Senate select inquiry into the Portico Erwin Contreras agreement. And you see, Madam President, you say, Madam President, and you pull me tongue, and I'm going to sit down right here. I promise you I'm going to sit down right here. But, Madam President, when you hear rumblings, we have to ensure and remind the Belizean people what Senator Chanona just painstakingly read. It's not just, you see, Madam President, about the signing of this document. The public wants to know what happened concerning that document during the time of this administration. I heard a member for Caribbean Shores in the House on TV saying, man, the inquiry should circle around the signing of this thing. want to keep it there. But no. Let the Senate be reminded and the public be reminded that this inquiry is not just about this ugly baby that the Minister of Education talked about, but also the attempted adoption of this ugly baby, the dressing up of this ugly baby, all except the bathing of this ugly baby. So, Madam President, we support the motion because we would like to know what happened that led to the signing of that document by the then minister and by the people who provoked him to sign that document, and what type of provocation took place to sign that document. Because, Madam President, it takes two to tango. So if we get into the details of the receiver, purportedly, then we get into the details of the giver and the gift. So, Madam President, let's have it. Let's have it. But not only that, Madam President. Let's have what the Prime Minister called a sham from the beginning in the House. Let him explain then how come environmental clearance was given for this in 2021 during your time, if it was a sham from the beginning. Ask why every UDP arrangement is attacked and lashed except for this one. This one had studies. The cabinet paper mentioned by Senator Chanona said the man don't spend a company with 10,000 shares of 100 shares issued each to two people. How come they have already expended $23 million Belize? On what? What's the basis for the government come up with 11.5 times 2, that 23? 23. How did they come up with that 23 million? How did the government accept that as money when well spent? Did the AG's ministry draft that piece of legislation that they wanted to pass in cabinet for this sham, for this ugly baby? Huh? Who led the charge to say we need to pass this? We have to pass this. Because the level of preparation in the cabinet paper, the legislation, the legal advice, this is a matter that was going to be passed. Yet, you call it a sham from the beginning. An ugly baby. Huh? Why, when I wrote the Prime Minister in March 2023, they said, Prime Minister, here you have a signed definitive agreement out there, dating back to our time in government. Please provide me with it. Still no answer to this day. But yet it appears before cabinet. And oh my God, these members of cabinet had a road to Damascus moment and say, you know what? Boy, this no good, you know. Like some of us haven't been in cabinet before and know how cabinet papers work. That came to be passed and it was rejected by supposedly some good Samaritan senators within the POP cabinet. I want to know who they. So all of this we need to know, Madam President. All of this we need to know why you get advice that says this definitive agreement no good. You know good. From Ben Juratowicz. And we never need him to tell me that, you know, Madam President. We knew that wasn't good. But you still get advice. So what do? Given your nature, when you get an advice you don't like, you go pay for your next advice. Who then says, you know what, why this thing could work, you know. This thing could work. They went opinion shopping. Never mention any of the opinions in the cabinet paper. Never mention at all in the National Assembly the negative opinion that came before the preferred opinion. How much their opinions then cost? Because we can tell them that for free. That no good. all of these things, we want to find out all the processes, who benefited, who did not benefit because you want to claim some untoward behavior that led to the signing. Well, have the committee find out what, if any, untoward behavior took place before the tabling of this matter. And why is it that this government seems to be willing to go broke, politically broke, for Portico? All of those things, Madam President, we want to find out. So don't let this only stop at the beginning. Let us take it right through to where we are now and see if indeed this was a second retirement package for the boys. Let's see. Let's find out. Let's have an investigation, full-fledged. Someone who you have to summon. Let them answer. Let them tell you what led to where we are now with this particular sham of an agreement indeed from the very beginning. And why did this government said, let the torpedoes be damned? We are going for this. We're going to push this. And Madam President, someone, whoever they have to summon, from First Caribbean, bring everybody, because they have an office here and a company here. Summon them too, as to why a publicly traded company like that is carrying on the way they're carrying on. Summon everybody so we can get to the bottom of all of this, so the Belizean people can know what truly happened in 2020 October, what happened that led to May of 2023, and what is currently happening with that agreement. So with that, Madam President, let it open. Let's see what we can find, and may the chips fall wherever they may. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Kevin Herrera.
Thank you, Madam President. Madam President, I'll be relatively brief. I want to add an amendment that we had discussed earlier that I think was just omitted when Senator Chonona presented, and that would be in 2A of the motion, where it says one from those appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister. You have two from those appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister. Madam President, initially when we had put the motion together among our social partners, the idea was to try to keep the composition of the work of the senators participating on the committee relatively small, and so we were trying. But we understand as well, given the previous Senate Select Committee investigation in 2016, that there were two representatives on the government side, and so in complying to that, we're suggesting the amendment from 1 to 2 in there. Madam President, out of respect for the process, I don't want to say too much in terms of what we have before us, other than what's presented in the motion. We expect a objective, professional process. We want to give all parties an opportunity for the truth to come out. And so we expect that, we will work diligently so that the Belizean public will have a much clearer view of what the situation is, what happened in the past, and as well, just fulfilling our constitutionally mandated role under 61A 2D, I believe, which is Senate investigation. So we look forward to the process. Like I mentioned, we hope to conduct this process in a very fair, transparent, objective manner. Thank you, Madam President.
I recognize Senator Luke Martinez.
Madam President, I've been wondering why suddenly we have so many vultures flying around Jankro. And it is because, Madam President, obviously, the scent of corruption with this definitive agreement is so high that the Jankro is looking for it. Corruption, 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 Madam President. And so we've been trying to wrap our heads around this definitive agreement. Senator Perfit called it the Erwin Contreras agreement. They call it the UDP agreement. I said then. Yes. And then, obviously, it seems as if though we have some honorable members in cabinet who decided that they were going to be whistleblowers. So then this reminds me that we need to be serious about the whistleblowers legislation. 1, 2, run the campaign finance legislation, leader of government business. Run the campaign finance legislation, because when we start with this inquiry, we'll find out indeed who has set up their retirement plan and who's setting up their retirement plan, Madam President. And so, when in our case, the unions, and we have the public sector unions right now, who are preparing to engage in some serious negotiations with government as it relates to pension reform. We can't be preparing to discuss pension reform when cabinet are displaying some very shaky traits. Yes, we're talking about that motion, Senator Montejo. Yeah, of course, because it has to do with labor, you'll not be able to tie both of them together. Yes. So, Madam President, we're hoping that the process will be fair and just, and that we'll get to the bottom of this definitive agreement. Thank you very much.
I recognize Senator Bishop Alvid Bengushe.
Thank you very much, Madam President, and thank you for the opportunity to be able to share a few items on this very important motion before us this morning. Madam President, the questions we are asking, and justifiably so, is the who, the what, the when, and the why. And we are supposed to seek to answer these questions as we go forward. I believe that perhaps I might not necessarily be in the best position. Perhaps there are some senators here who are better qualified than myself to be able to answer those questions. But nonetheless, the questions must not only be asked, but the questions must be answered. But I would like to be definitive, and I want to be clear in what I have to share on this motion this morning, this afternoon. I want to remind us, as perhaps others have done, that the government, in its 28 January 2021 writings or in its understanding of partnership and dealing with the whole issue of corruption, made mention of the fact that it was in support of good governance. And I think it is important to point that out, because I must point out that the church is in support of that, and I'm certain as it is other bodies. I want to emphasize that because that, I think, is an important element in this whole thing that we will debate and that we're asked to act upon. Madam President, the fundamental issue of good governance impacts all of us. It is expected that perhaps politicians must behave in a certain way, and that they too are expecting civil servants and persons in ordinary society to behave a certain way. It means that, Madam President, we're asked to be honorable and to ensure that we share a level of responsibility and truth insofar as the country is concerned. That is what is expected that we will teach our children. That is what we're expecting our teachers will be able to pass on to our children. And so I think, Madam President, or maybe I don't think, but I know it hinges for me on the whole issue of our morality and our ethics, the way in which, as leaders, we go about making decisions in a responsible way or in a willy-nilly way, as I would say. It brings into focus desperately the need for us as a country to be able to rediscover what I say lost values. I believe that as I think about the forefathers, the Honorable George Cadle Price and the Honorable Philip Golson, that they would expect from us, we who are sitting here this morning and those sitting in other places, they would expect from us to act in a responsible, in a moral, and in an ethical way. And where we see that in decision making, some things, some indecision or some wrong decision raises its ugly head, they would expect of us to be able to speak to these things. And so I believe, Madam President, that as we see today, that it is perhaps for me a little bit unfortunate that we're here, I would say. But we are here. And the fundamental argument is that we must be able to come to the truth. And we must be able to be honest with each other. Madam President, I believe that surrounding this entire thing, and from what I have read and from what I have ascertained from the research I have done, that indeed there is something for us to investigate. I do not want to stand here this afternoon, this morning, thank you. I do not want to stand here this morning and take any sides, because that is not the intent. I do not want to stand here and throw stones and blame anybody, because that is not the intent. The intent is to be able to come to the truth. Madam President, there is a question that I was asked some time ago when I first became a senator. And when an issue was raised concerning the legalization of cannabis in Belize. And I was asked then that why is the church making so much noise? And why would the country have to expend so much money in ensuring that we ask our people to be able to ratify or not ratify whether we want such a legislation passed in Belize. I was asked then what and why we would have to spend so much money. I suppose the same question was asked of me this time around. Why is it that for such a quote-unquote simple thing, the social partners are clamoring to have such a committee in place? And how much money will have to be expended in order to have such a committee in place, etc., etc. And I answered the question by saying, whatever we expend must be morally right. And whatever money is in place, we find money for other things. We must be able to find money for such a committee. And we must be able to get to the bottom of this. And so when we talk about finance, I'm saying, Madam President, that we account and we find money for other things. I'm saying that in order to keep the moral fabric and the ethical fabric of this country alive, we must be able to put such a committee together, no matter what it costs. And I want to conclude, Madam President, by saying this, that the motion before us comes at a time when we must, as I said, be reminded that we must not only think of the moral fabric of our country, but we must think about the compass that points in the direction of our youth, that it is important to prioritize and think about them for the future. And that is my contribution that I would like to make this morning.
I recognize Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I rise to support the motion as amended and to say unequivocally that the PUP senators in the Senate fully support an inquiry into these matters. Madam President, like Senator Kevin Herrera, I don't think it is right and proper to delve into the issues, the facts, for want of a better expression. And so I will refrain from doing that. The committee will be established and it will have the power to summon people, request documentation, and to, quote unquote, as Senator Bengoshe says, find the truth. I welcome what I perceive to be the flexibility of the proponent of the motion to bring the motion into a more accurate mode. The amendments that have been proposed reflect the facts. Madam President, one amendment that I believe is critically important to be made in the recitals which I shared with the social partners, but apparently they don't agree with it, and I would like to know why. Our proposal is that the following be added to the recitals of the motion. As a fifth recital, whereas on the 16th June 2023, the Honorable Prime Minister informed the House of Representatives and the nation that the government, by cabinet decision, will not proceed with the definitive agreement by and between the government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, doing business as the Port of Magical Belize. That is a critically important fact as they set out the chronology to ground the motion. And it is my respectful proposal that the motion be amended to reflect that fact. Senator Bengoshe made the point that the question arises as to how much it's going to cost, will it be money well spent, etc., and he gave his rationale. And I think it is important in that context to emphasize that insofar as the government is concerned, this definitive agreement will not be proceeded with. Madam President, the other issue that we have raised and some accommodation has been given is on the question of the composition. The composition of the committee as proposed is not in compliance with the standing orders. And Madam President, that standing order provides that committees of the Senate should reflect the balance of the Senate, which is 6 for the government, 3 for the opposition, 4 for social partners. Prior select committees, special select committees, have been appointed because the parties have come to an understanding as to composition. And no one took the position that the standing orders were not being complied with. No. I have sought to reach out to the proponent to propose a formula for us to comply with the standing orders. And we propose, Madam President, that the committee should have, to reflect the balance, 3 from the government, 2 from the social partners, and 1 from the opposition. We remain open, Madam President, at this late stage to discussing the composition of the committee with a view in committee at arriving at an agreed composition. I close by saying this, Madam President. On each occasion that this issue has arisen, there has been a narrative that has been promulgated and spread. A lot of it will be shown in this inquiry to be false, to be fake, to be rumors. This committee is embarking on an important mission. In order to do its work, it needs, with respect, to stick to the facts, to go into rumors and innuendos will cause serious ramifications for the result of the work. And so, Madam President, we support the establishment of the Special Senate Select Committee to look into the issues identified in the motion as amended, and hopefully we are able to agree the composition of the Special Select Committee. Those are my recommendations, Madam President, and as I say, hopefully in committee we can come out with an agreed motion. Thank you.
I recognize Senator Janelle Chanona.
With your leave, Madam President, I mentioned composition of the Senate amendment, but I failed to expound on it. If you'd grant me leave just to read it into the record. I believe it's on. Sorry? Well, yes, if anybody else have. Well, I'm asking anybody else wants to speak.
I saw no one else.
Neither did I, Madam President.
Senator Janelle Chanona.
Thank you, Madam President. I failed to expound on the reference I made in terms of the amendment proposed to the motion in terms of the composition. If you'd allow me, I'll just read it. The clerk already has the language, but just so that it's on the record, that under terms of reference at 2, composition of Special Select Committee, A1 states 1 from those appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister. The amendment is to replace the word 1 with the word 2 so as to read 2 from those appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister. I ask that the question be put.
Madam President, in accordance with Standing Order 10.8, I move that the proceedings on the order paper may be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour though opposed.
Honourable members, the question is that the proceedings on the order paper may be entered upon and proceeded with at this day's sitting at any hour though opposed. All those in favour, kindly say aye. Those against, kindly say no. The ayes have it.
Madam President, if I may, just in form of a question. I know there's an amendment to change the 1 appointed by the Prime Minister to 2, but the rest remain the same. In other words, then will there still be 4 from the...
One each from the social partners. That's the amended version. Can we ask for a division of the vote?
Thank you,
We would like it on
Senator
record. Thank you.
Chanona, for wrapping up the debate on the private member motion. At this time, I'm going to call a 15 minutes recess, and then we will reconvene. Thereafter, I will pose the question and ask for the opinion of the decision or the voting of the Senate.
The Senate resumes.
Honorable members, as indicated prior to us going on recess, and I will now put forward the resolution and pose the question. Honorable members, the question is, now therefore be it resolved that the Senate shall approve the appointment pursuant to Standing Order Number 69 of a Special Select Committee of the Senate, hereinafter referred to as the committee, with the following terms of reference and composition. Terms of reference. A. To conduct an independent and impartial investigation and inquiry into the signing of the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 1st, 2020, and to determine which, if any, established procedures under investment policy were followed. To determine what advice, policy, or basis the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development, and Investment, in consultation with the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations, relied upon to prepare Cabinet Confidential Memorandum Number 84 of 2023, recommendations and draft legislation, and subsequently submitted for Cabinet's consideration and approval, into all communications and documentations tied to the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 1st, 2020, into all communications and documentations tied to the document titled Definitive Agreement by and between the Government of Belize and Portico Enterprises Limited, the Port of Magical Belize, dated October 1, 2020, being presented to Cabinet along with related draft legislation as attachments to Cabinet Confidential Memo Number 84 of 2023 in May 15th, 2023, with certain recommendations from the Ministry of Finance, Economic Development and Investment, in consultation with the Ministry of Tourism and Diaspora Relations. B. To require the production of such communications and documentations, papers, and records as the committee shall deem relevant to the inquiry, and to examine pertinent documentation. C. To determine whether, consequent on the investigation and inquiry, statutory and other procedures were complied with. D. To require the attendance before the committee of former ministers of government, current ministers of government, signatories of the agreement, and or those who may have information by virtue of his office which may be relevant to the inquiry, pursuant to Section 61A 2G of the Constitution of Belize. To require the attendance before the committee of those heads of departments, regulatory committees, and or those who may have information by virtue of his office are responsible for and involved with the issuance of environmental compliance, clearance permits, et al., and or any other official of government who may have information which may be relevant to the inquiry pursuant to Section 61A2H of the Constitution of Belize. F. To require the attendance before the committee of all such current and former public officers in the ministry responsible for ministries of investment and trade, economic development, finance, tourism, etc., as well as those responsible for ports, environment, etc., pursuant to Standing Order Number 72 of the Senate Standing Orders, as well as to produce all relevant communication, papers, and records of the ministry, departments, et al., as may be necessary to conduct its inquiry and investigation. G, to examine all such persons required to attend before the committee as witnesses pursuant to Standing Order Number 72 of the Senate Standing Orders. H, to hold and conduct its sittings and meetings in public and broadcast live, except for sittings which are held only for the purpose of deliberation of the matters which are the subject of the committee, which sittings shall be held in private. I, that the committee shall hold its hearings with due urgency and expedition in accordance with Standing Order Number 75 of the Senate Standing Orders, make a report to this Honorable Senate as soon as may be practicable of the result of its inquiries, with all such comments and recommendations as the committee may deem fit, furnishing this Honorable Senate with a full statement of its proceedings and of the reasons leading to its conclusions and recommendations. J, that the report shall be tabled in this Honorable Senate and become a public document. K, all committee members shall be allowed sufficient time and equal opportunity to question witnesses and shall be permitted to question each witness who attends a sitting. L, each witness shall be afforded the opportunity pursuant to Standing Order Number 7213 of the Senate Standing Orders to review his or her evidence and the findings of the report, and shall have opportunity to suggest corrections due to inaccurate reporting within 14 days of the date from which the report was sent to the witness by the clerk. M, the committee shall be permitted to hire attorneys, accountants, and such other experts as required by the committee. And N, the office of the Senate shall be the office of the Secretariat of the committee. 2, composition of special select committee. A, that the committee be appointed consisting of 7 senators as follows. 1, 2 from those appointed on the advice of the Prime Minister. 2, 1 from those appointed on the advice of the Leader of the Opposition. 3, the one appointed on the advice of the Belize Council of Churches and the Evangelical Association of Churches. 4, the one appointed on the advice of the Belize Chamber of Commerce and Industry and the Belize Business Bureau. 5, the one appointed on the advice of the National Trade Union Congress and the Civil Society Steering Committee. And 6, the one appointed on the advice of the non-governmental organizations. B, the senators who are members of the committee shall at the first meeting of the committee elect a chairman of the committee. And C, the quorum of the committee shall be 4. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it. I recognize the Leader of Government Business.
Madam President, I move that the Senate do now adjourn.
Honorable members, the question is that the Senate do now adjourn. All those in favor kindly say aye. Those against kindly say no. The ayes have it. The Senate now stands adjourned.